The cargo freighter tore through the atmosphere like a dying star. Trailing fire and smoke across the violet sky of Terex 9, inside the cockpit, Nadia Voss fought with the controls, her knuckles white against the steering column as alarms screamed their final warnings. The navigation systems had failed 3 minutes ago, the life support 2 minutes after that, and now the hull integrity sensors showed nothing but red. She barely remembered the impact. One moment, the ground rushed up to meet her through the cracked viewport, all jagged rocks and twisted metal trees. The next, everything went dark, swallowed by pain and the acrid smell of burning circuits. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. Cold metal pressed against her cheek, blood pooled warm beneath her ribs. Somewhere distant, something howled in the alien dusk. Nadia tried to move and immediately regretted it. Her left leg screamed protest, bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. Her right arm hung useless, possibly broken at the shoulder. Through the shattered canopy above, she could see 3 moons rising in sequence, each a different shade of amber and gold. Beautiful, she thought distantly, even as her vision began to blur. She had never expected to die on a planet whose name she only knew from shipping manifests. The howling grew closer. Through the haze of pain, Nadia saw shapes moving in the wreckage low to the ground, quadrupedal things with too many joints in their legs. Scavengers, her training whispered. Every planet had them. Creatures that fed on the dead and the dying, that could smell blood from kilometers away. She reached for the emergency beacon on her belt, but her fingers found only empty air. The device had been torn away in the crash. The creatures circled closer, their chittering calls echoing off the twisted metal. Nadia closed her eyes, too tired to feel afraid anymore. At least it would be quick. At least she would not die alone in the silent void between stars. But then, a new sound cut through the evening air. Not animal, not machine, something in between. A low, resonant hum that made the scavengers freeze in their tracks. A figure emerged from the smoke. Tall and lean, moving with a grace that seemed impossible in the treacherous terrain. Nadia forced her eyes to focus. Not human. The proportions were all wrong, the limbs too long, the head too narrow, the skin shimmering with patterns that shifted like oil on water. An alien. One of the Terexians, the native inhabitants she had been warned to avoid. The figure raised something that glowed with soft blue light, and the scavengers scattered, disappearing into the ruins with frightened cries. Then the alien knelt beside her, and Nadia saw eyes the color of deep ocean water. Filled with something she had not expected, concern, the alien spoke. Words that sounded like wind through hollow reeds. Incomprehensible, but somehow gentle, Nadia tried to speak, to warn him away, to tell him that helping her would bring trouble from both their peoples. But darkness rushed up again, warm and welcoming, and this time she let it take her. The last thing she felt was the alien lifting her carefully, cradling her broken body as if she weighed nothing at all. The last thing she heard was that same resonant hum, closer now, almost like a lullaby. And somewhere in the dying light, Nadia Voss began a journey she could never have imagined. Sanctuary in silence, Nadia woke to the smell of earth and something sweet, like honey mixed with rain. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to dim light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Above her stretched a ceiling of living rock, veined with glowing moss that pulsed gently, breathing light into the darkness. She lay on something soft, a bed of woven fibers that cradled her body with unexpected comfort. Memory returned in a rush. The crash, the pain, the scavengers, and the alien who had saved her. Nadia tried to sit up and gasped as fresh pain lanced through her ribs. But it was less than before, much less. She looked down at herself and froze. Her clothes had been removed, replaced with a simple garment made of the same woven material as the bed. Her wounds had been dressed with strips of fabric that glowed faintly, and beneath them, she could feel her skin tingling with strange warmth. A sound made her turn her head. The alien stood across the chamber, his back to her as he worked at a table covered with plants. In the better light, she could see him more clearly. His skin was a deep teal, marked with silver patterns that flowed like rivers across his shoulders and down his arms. His hair, if it could be called that, consisted of thin tendrils that moved independently, responding to his emotions or thoughts. He wore simple clothing, practical and worn, the garments of someone who spent his life working with his hands. He turned, sensing her gaze, and their eyes met. For a long moment, neither moved. Nadia saw intelligence in those ocean-colored eyes, and caution, and something else that made her breath catch. Curiosity, wonder, the same things she felt looking at him. He approached slowly, hands raised to show he meant no harm, and spoke again in that reed-like language. When she did not respond, he tilted his head, considering. Then he did something unexpected. He placed one hand over his chest and spoke a single word. Rachin, his name. Nadia understood immediately and mimicked the gesture, pointing to herself. Nadia. The alien, Rachin, repeated it carefully, his mouth struggling with the unfamiliar sounds. Nadia. Close enough. He smiled, and she was surprised to see that his expression translated across their biological divide. Warmth, approval, connection. Over the following days, they developed a careful routine. Rachin brought her food, strange fruits, and cooked grains that tasted nothing like human cuisine but nourished her nonetheless. He changed her dressings twice daily, his touch clinical yet gentle, always careful not to cause unnecessary pain. The glowing bandages worked miracles. Her ribs knitted themselves faster than should have been possible. Her shoulder regained mobility, even her shattered leg began to heal. Though she still could not put weight on it, communication remained a challenge. They resorted to gestures, to drawing scratched in the dirt floor, to pointing and demonstrating. Rachin showed her his work with the plants, how he cultivated them for their healing properties, how each species required specific conditions of light and water and soil. Nadia watched, fascinated despite herself. On her third day, she found herself laughing when Rachin accidentally knocked over a container and scrambled, comically to catch the spilling liquid. The sound startled them both. Rachin stared at her, his head tendrils lifting, and what she had learned meant surprise. Then his own lips curved upward, and he made a sound that might have been his people's equivalent of laughter, soft chiming like wind through crystal. In that moment, something shifted between them. No longer just survivor and rescuer, but two beings finding unexpected joy in each other's presence. That night, as Nadia lay in her bed and watched the glowing moss pulse overhead, she thought about her situation. She should be planning escape, trying to repair her beacon, finding a way back to human space. But instead, she found herself thinking about Ren's careful hands tending the plants. His patient attempts to communicate, the way his patterns brightened when she smiled at him. She was in more danger than she realized, but not from the alien world outside. By the second week, Nadia could walk with only a slight limp. Rachin had fashioned her a cane from a piece of pale wood that felt warm to the touch, and she used it to explore his underground sanctuary. The place was larger than she had first realized, a network of chambers carved from living rock and connected by smooth passages. Everywhere she looked, life flourished in forms she had never imagined. One chamber housed what could only be called a library, but instead of books, the walls held living tablets. Sheets of thin membrane stretched across frames, each one inscribed with symbols that glowed and shifted. Another chamber contained pools of water in varying colors, from crystal clear to deep indigo. Each maintained at different temperatures for reasons she could not guess. Ren's world was one of careful cultivation, understanding and nurturing the systems around him. She began to help where she could. At first it was simple tasks, like carrying water or sorting seeds. But as her strength returned, Rachin taught her more complex procedures. How to test soil acidity using a plant that changed color based on chemical composition. How to cross-pollinate certain flowers using a delicate brush made from his own shed tendrils. How to harvest sap without harming the parent tree. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, developing an understanding that transcended language. One evening, Rachin took her hand and led her up a narrow passage she had not noticed before. They climbed for what felt like an eternity, her leg protesting the exertion, till finally they emerged onto a plateau hidden among the rocks. The view stole her breath. The three moons hung low on the horizon, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. The alien forest stretched out below them, bioluminescent patterns rippling through the canopy like waves on an ocean. RHN gestured for her to sit, and they settled on the smooth stone, shoulders nearly touching. He reached into the pouch at his belt and withdrew something carefully wrapped in leaves. When he unwrapped it, Nadia gasped. A flower, unlike anything she had seen even in his sanctuary. Its petals were translucent, edged with silver, and at its center burned a light that shifted through the spectrum. Responding to the moon's positions, he spoke, his tone reverent. And though she did not understand the words, she grasped the meaning. This flower was special, rare, perhaps even sacred, and he was sharing it with her. Nadia reached out slowly, and Arachan guided her hand to touch the petals. They were impossibly soft, and where her skin made contact, the light brightened, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. She looked at Arachan and found him watching her, not the flower. His expression open in a way she had not seen before. The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious. Then, moving with the same care he showed his plants, RHN reached out and took her hand properly, fingers intertwining with hers. His skin was cooler than human skin, smooth and strange, but the gesture was universal. Connection, affection, perhaps the beginning of something deeper. Nadia felt her pulse quicken, felt warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with alien healing technology. They sat like that as the moons completed their arc across the sky. Hands clasped, sharing silence more intimate than any conversation. When the first moon began to set, Arachan turned to her and spoke again, softly, a question in his tone. Nadia did not know what he asked, but she knew her answer. She squeezed his hand gently and leaned against his shoulder, feeling his body tense with surprise before slowly relaxing. The journey down was slower, neither wanting to break the spell. Back in the sanctuary, Rachan showed her to her chamber with new hesitation, as if unsure of the boundaries they had just redrawn. Nadia solved the problem by reaching up and touching his face, tracing the silver patterns on his cheek. He closed his eyes, his tendrils curling with what she had learned was pleasure, but their peace was about to shatter. As they stood there, lost in each other, neither noticed the faint vibration that ran through the stone. Neither heard the distant hum of engines overhead. The search parties had finally expanded their grid, and they were running out of time. The pounding on the outer door came at dawn. Nadia woke to Ren's hand over her mouth, his eyes wide with fear. She had never seen him afraid before, and the sight sent ice through her veins. He pulled her up, gesturing frantically for silence, and led her deeper into the sanctuary as voices echoed through the passages. Harsh voices, speaking his language with tones of authority and anger. They found a hiding place behind a curtain of hanging. Moss, in the cultivation chamber. Through the translucent fronds, Nadia watched as three aliens entered. They're bearing military, their skin marked with patterns that denoted rank or clan. They confronted Arachan in the center of the chamber, surrounding him, their words rapid and accusatory. She did not need translation to understand. They knew somehow they had discovered he was harboring her. Rachan stood his ground, his tendrils rigid with defiance, arguing back with increasing passion. One of the soldiers gestured sharply at the sanctuary around them, at the carefully tended plants, clearly threatening. Ren's work, his life's purpose, would be destroyed if he did not comply. Another soldier produced a device that projected a hologram, showing images of Nadia's crashed ship, of human military vessels in orbit, of rising tensions between their peoples. The message was clear. She was a threat, a spy, an enemy. But Archon shook his head violently, placed his hand over his chest where his heart would be, and spoke a single word that Nadia had taught him weeks ago. Friend. The soldiers reacted with shock, then disgust. One spat something that made Ren's patterns flash dark with anger. Then they issued what could only be an ultimatum. Surrender the human, or face exile and the destruction of everything he had built. Nadia could not let this happen. Before Arachan could respond, she pushed through the moss curtain and stepped into view. The soldiers spun toward her, weapons appearing in their hands with frightening speed. But Nadia raised her hands, showing she was unarmed. and walked slowly to stand beside RH, and his hand found hers immediately. Squeezing hard, and she squeezed back. The lead soldier spoke, his tone harsh, clearly ordering them both to come. Rachan looked at Nadia, his ocean eyes filled with anguish and apology. She shook her head slightly. Not his fault. Never his fault. Then she made a decision. She pointed to herself, then to the door, then to RH-chan and the sanctuary, making her meaning clear. She would go. He would stay. It was the only way to protect what he had built. But RH-chan responded by pulling her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders in a gesture of protection that transcended species. He spoke rapidly to the soldiers, his tone firm. And though Nadia could not understand the words, she understood the meaning. No. If she went, he went. They were together now. The soldiers exchanged glances, clearly not prepared for this development. More words were exchanged, threats made, but RH-chan remained unmoved. Finally, the lead soldier made a sharp gesture and spoke what sounded like a command. The other two advanced, reaching for Nadia. Rachan moved faster than she thought possible, placing himself between her and them, his normally gentle nature vanishing in the face of threat. A brief scuffle ensued, and in the chaos, Rachan grabbed Nadia's hand and ran. They fled through passages she had never explored, spiraling up and out, emerging into the harsh daylight of Terex 9. Behind them, shouts and the sound of pursuit. RH-chan pulled her toward the forest, toward the dangerous wilderness he had always warned her away from. But there was no choice now. They ran together, her limp forgotten in the surge of adrenaline, his hand firm in hers, and between them passed an unspoken vow. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Love had found them in the wreckage of her old life, and neither would let it go without a fight. Love beyond the stars, the crystalline caves were supposed to be impassable. Deadly formations that reflected and amplified the planet's dangerous radiation. But RH knew a path, a narrow channel where the crystals grew in specific patterns that created a safe corridor. They stumbled through in the failing light, both exhausted, both knowing that pursuit was not far behind. When they finally emerged into a hidden grotto, Nadia collapsed against the wall, her healing leg finally giving out. Rachan knelt beside her immediately, his hands checking her injuries with practiced skill. But when he was satisfied she was unharmed, he did not move away. Instead, he cupped her face in his hands, his touch trembling, and spoke words she still could not understand but felt in every fiber of her being. His patterns glowed bright in the darkness, reflecting off the crystals around them in cascades of light. Nadia reached up and covered his hands with hers, then pulled him closer. The kiss, when it came, was tentative at first, exploring the differences between their mouths, their bodies, their very biology. But hesitation melted quickly into passion born of fear and relief and the desperate need to affirm that they were alive, together, against all odds. They sank to the cave floor, crystal light dancing over their intertwined forms as they discovered each other fully for the first time. Later, wrapped in each other's arms on the hard stone that somehow felt softer than any bed, they spoke without words. Rachan traced patterns on her skin that mirrored his own, claiming her in the way of his people. Nadia whispered his name like a prayer, like a promise. Outside, the three moons rose again, their light filtering through the crystals in rainbow refractions. Inside, two beings from different worlds found a wholeness neither had known they were missing. But dawn brought reality crashing back. The sound of engines overhead, human and alien both, converging on their position. They had been tracked, probably by thermal signatures or scanning equipment. There was nowhere left to run. Rachan and Nadia emerged from the cave hand in hand, blinking in the harsh morning light, to find themselves surrounded, human soldiers on one side, weapons trained, Terexian military on the other, equally armed, and between them, caught in the crossfire of mutual suspicion and fear. Two lovers who had committed the crime of carrying across species lines. The human commander stepped forward, a woman with steel in her eyes. Voss, step away from the hostile. Nadia tightened her grip on Ren's hand. He's not hostile. He saved my life. His name is Arachin, the Terexian leader spoke, and though Nadia could not understand, she heard Ren's name repeated, along with words that sounded like accusations. The tension ratcheted higher. Fingers moved toward triggers, but then Arachan did something unexpected. He pulled from his pouch the same flower he had shown her under the moons, the rare blossom that bloomed only in specific light. He held it up between the two forces, speaking clearly in both languages. Having learned enough human words to make himself understood, "Ancient peace," he said haltingly, pointing to the flower, then to the ruins behind them. "Our peoples together before grow this together. Remember," he gestured to the ruins again, more urgently, and slowly understanding dawned. These were not natural formations. They were structures, ancient meeting places where humans and Terexians had once cooperated. Before some forgotten conflict drove them apart, the commanders exchanged glances, uncertainty replacing hostility. Rachin pressed his advantage, speaking rapidly now, gesturing to Nadia, to himself, to the flower. One of the human soldiers, a young man with curiosity in his eyes, stepped forward to examine the ruins more closely. "Commander, he might be right. These markings, they're human and alien both. This could be significant." The moment hung on a knife's edge. Then, slowly, the human commander lowered her weapon. "Stand down. We need historians, not bullets." The Terexian leader hesitated longer, but finally issued a similar command. Weapons lowered on both sides. Rachin and Nadia remained standing, still clasped together, hardly daring to believe they might survive this. 6 months later, the research station that rose from those ancient ruins bore both human and Terexian design, a testament to what cooperation could achieve. Nadia and Arachin worked there together, their love story having become something larger than themselves, a symbol of hope and reconciliation. Each evening they walked to the plateau where he had first shown her the moonflowers, and there, under 3 moons that had witnessed their journey, they held each other and planned a future neither had dared dream possible. From wreckage and ruin, from fear and difference, love had built something new, and the stars themselves seemed to shine brighter for it.